On today's episode of The Lawyer You Know, we're going to break down the lawsuit Parler filed against Amazon for kicking them off their servers. As most people know, Amazon kicked Parler off of their servers, effectively ending their social media website, and Parler has responded by filing a lawsuit. Dad, as we start this conversation about the lawsuit, give a brief description of what's happened to Parler since the Capitol riot, since Trump's speech, since all that violence and stuff went down in D.C.
Well, Parler initially was a website normally considered to be a right-wing website.
It's a conservative social media site.
Right. So it had, in January 2020, it had about, I think it was about 2 to 4 million viewers. After the riots, it jumped up to 15 million viewers. And it's growing. In fact, it was the largest, the most downloaded app on the Apple website.
And a lot of people responded from Twitter and Facebook kicking Trump off to going to Parler, leaving Twitter, leaving Facebook. So it was becoming a competitor to those sites, even though it didn't really grow to that scale.
No,
and then what happened?
Not even near their numbers.
Right.
Yeah. Well, then what happened was that I think Apple was the first one, and Google kicked them off their app site, so you couldn't download their app. Mm-hmm. That was the first thing that happened. And then eventually Amazon came along, kicked them off their servers, which means you couldn't get them on the internet. So they didn't have an internet presence, they didn't have an app presence, they were gone.
So when you think about hurdles for a social media site, obviously it's got to be in the App Store. People have to be able to download it. They've got to be able to find it. They've got to be able to find their friends, talk to them. That went away when they were bounced off the App Stores. But then they couldn't even go online once Amazon kicked them off, which is why they sued Amazon. And in that lawsuit, they made multiple claims, but the three we're going to focus on are the antitrust violation, a breach of contract, and an interference with the company's business relationships, also known as tortious interference with contract. So when we talk about these types of claims, Dad, why don't you break down a little bit about what is an antitrust violation? How does it come into play with these social media websites and specifically Parler's lawsuit?
Well, it's kind of funny because they really started a long time ago, before there was even the internet. And it really started with Standard Oil. And they said Standard Oil just eliminated competition by buying all their competition, so you couldn't go buy oil anywhere. So then they did a thing called the Sherman Antitrust Act, which meant that you had to have competition within a particular industry.
I know the sports leagues went through this as well.
And they got an exemption.
Right.
Baseball got an exemption.
Professional sports leagues, yeah.
Right. So whenever like a big purchase, you hear it all the time, so-and-so is going to purchase another big competitor. Well, when they do that, and they dominate a particular industry, the Department of Justice has to actually approve the sale so that they do not violate antitrust regulations. And again, make it so that you don't have competition.
And social media does kind of fit into that because you know the big players, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and a lot of times when a new thing like Instagram or Snapchat comes up, Facebook will buy them. So Facebook owns them even though there's another social media site. So it does kind of fall into this antitrust world where they are dominating the social media landscape and big tech, quote unquote, as it's been known.
Why do you think they buy them?
Right.
They buy them because they see something coming along and they figure, hey, we better get this now or we're going to end up being behind the 8 ball.
And they already have the infrastructure so they can really scale those smaller sites and smaller businesses. And a lot of the people that create the smaller sites want to eventually be purchased by a Facebook or a Twitter or something like that.
Get bought by at a premium.
So when talking about this lawsuit, what is Parler claiming as far as antitrust violations, breach of contract, things like that? What are some of the claims they're making against Amazon?
Well, I think the big claim is the antitrust violation, saying that they dominate an industry so much that there isn't any competition, and therefore they're eliminating competition when they cut out certain websites like Parler. And so Parler is saying you can't do that, you've got to have competition, and therefore there's an antitrust violation. There's also the injunction, where they came into the court and they asked the judge, hey, we need an injunction right away because there is irreversible damage occurring right now because we're going to go broke immediately and we can't afford even to defend this lawsuit if you do not grant us an injunction requiring Amazon to put us back on the web.
So let's pause here for a second. So some of the irreparable harm that they actually mention is Trump has left Parler and has gone somewhere else and likely going to start his own social media site or something. But let's talk for a second about what an injunction is. So Parler's trying to get a temporary injunction. What is an injunction? What's the purpose of an injunction?
Injunction is for the court to order something to have the status quo remain. In other words, the status quo is Parler operates on the web.
So it's the court forcing somebody to do something. It's not money damages. It's not make them give us $10 million so we can keep operating. Instead, it is make them just turn the servers on and we'll litigate this lawsuit. And if we lose, they can cut us off the servers. But if we win and we've lost this period of time where we're not able to be on the servers, we're dead anyways. So they're basically saying, so as far as the court goes, just grant us this temporary injunction. Let us run our website. We'll hash out the breach of contract, the antitrust, all those claims. But if you don't let us be online while this is happening, we're going to die. What did the court say when they tried to get that temporary restraining order or injunction?
The court didn't see the need at that point. The court felt that it should be there should be time to work this out, to do some investigation, to make sure that the court has a justiciable issue, is what we call it, so that there can be a proper order given. The court wasn't going to rush into it. Plus, another aspect of the court case, you get an injunction because you can't be compensated by money damages.
Right.
For the damage.
Money's not going to fix their problem in this case because all the money in the world, they're not going to be able to create the servers they need to be running in time.
The court wasn't so sure. The court wasn't sure. Look, maybe if they put you out of business, then there may be a dollar amount that can compensate you for putting you out of business.
That's true too. So I'm going to pause right here for a second because I'd like to do this in the comments. Tell me whether or not you agree with the court's ruling. Do you agree that they shouldn't have granted the temporary restraining order? Do you think they should have? And if you like content like this, go ahead and like this video, subscribe to our page. We're going to come out with more videos like this, dealing with the lawsuits that I'm sure are going to come in this big tech industry. We're going to have some more political posts coming with the inauguration just recently happening. So give a like to this video, subscribe to it so you can be kept up to all the date and all the content that we're putting out. All right. So moving on from the temporary restraining order, what are some of the breach of contract claims that Parler is making against Amazon?
Well, they're saying they contract with them to provide this service and to provide this service uninterrupted and not to terminate them based on what they did. In other words, is their content the kind of thing that should be something that is terminated?
Parler is making these claims against Amazon, but let's take a second to talk about what is Amazon saying is the reason that they rightfully terminated Parler and cut off the servers. What is Amazon saying? What's the reason that they think they were able to do this?
Well, let's be careful because Amazon does not say they terminated them.
Right.
Amazon said they suspended them.
Okay.
Which the court found to be a very important distinction. Termination, they didn't end it. They suspended them until they created a policy that could monitor the violence and the threats that were being posted on the website.
So Amazon is saying, that's great. It's a great distinction. It's important. So Amazon is saying they have suspended Parler because they're not censoring their content to get rid of hate speech or inciting violence or speech that incites violence. And they basically have a problem with that, and therefore, as a private company, they're saying they can suspend Parler, right? So that's what Amazon's doing. We are actually, I'm going to do a separate video on protected speech and free speech to differentiate whether something is or is not free speech. So we're not going to take a lot of time on that in today's video, but like I said, if you subscribe, that video will pop up whenever it comes out. But when we're talking about those discussions or those accusations by Amazon, Parler's response was breach of contract and interference with the company's business relationships.
Right. They said they were terminated, not suspended. And they've got a different view than Amazon.
Right. Effectually, they think they were terminated. But what does Parler say is a breach of contract based on those accusations from Amazon?
Because they're saying that Amazon did not have the right under the contract to suspend them for these items because, again, we have a First Amendment right. We have the right to say what we want to say on the internet. And they also said that they were doing their monitoring. They said they had like 1,000 volunteers out there. Yes, things slip through, but they're making a good faith effort to do the monitoring that Amazon wanted. Amazon told them before they suspended them, they gave them a warning letter saying, look, you're not doing a good enough job. When things didn't change, they suspended them.
And Amazon said they actually warned Parler for a number of weeks because one of Parler's arguments in this breach of contract is that in the contract it says you're going to give them a 30-day notice of termination, which is why that termination is so important versus suspension, because if it was a termination, Amazon would have had to let them run or fix the problem within the 30 days of still being up on the servers, and they did not give them that courtesy or that amount of time to do so. So that termination versus suspension is important. And I feel like if Parler came out and said, fine, we're going to cut out all the hate speech, we're going to cut all that out, which is against what they say they're for, which is uncensored free speech. But I bet if they said we're going to get rid of all that and they showed that they could do it, Amazon would put them back up. And I bet that's the best argument for Amazon at this point.
I think the problem is who is it that is determining what is hate speech and what is violent speech. Parler said that some of the things they were talking about was not hate speech, was not violent speech, but people using free expression in the First Amendment. Amazon disagreed with that. I think we can see where we could have 2 points of view on the same speech, whether or not it is something that's objectionable and should cause a suspension or termination, or something that's not objectionable and the First Amendment says you can put it on. I mean, I remember when I was in law school, one of the things, and I know you're going to do a separate webcast on it, but the burning of the American flag, I certainly find that objectionable, but the Supreme Court said that that was protected by the First Amendment. So we really don't know how this is going to work out.
And I think you're going to be surprised when you hear that video of some of the things that was not called, or that was protected speech and was not unconstitutional and could not be stopped by a governmental agency, which I think is really important, because these non-governmental agencies, or as we know them as companies, like Amazon, a private company, does not have to have the same rules as the Constitution. They don't have to follow the law of the Constitution. They can make their own standards. And I think that's important in this case, that Amazon says the content on Parler encourages and incites violence against others, and Parler is unable or unwilling to promptly identify and remove that content, which is in violation of our terms of service. So Amazon is allowed to write their terms of service in a way that if they don't like what you're doing as a company on their servers, they can boot you off those servers, which is, I think, their prerogative. They're a private company, but I do think it's also scary when we talk about big tech and how much control they have on all of our phones and all of our computers and iPads, that they can just create these standards that are subjective to them, and we're stuck with it. Anybody that has a company that's online, anybody that has a website, could potentially be subjected to this type of action by Amazon or whoever runs your server. And that's kind of a scary thought.
Well, that's why a lot of congressmen are trying to change the rules when it comes to big tech and to these internet companies. Because I think it's Section 203 that protects them and allows them to do these things with immunity. And they're trying to pass a law or find out, look, you're a public utility. You can't just arbitrarily do things like kick people off. But they're a private company, so they can kick somebody off. So where do the rules, it's going to be a tough sell, and Congress is going to have to come up with something to solve these rules.
And I think it's also interesting to think about what Amazon actually has in their contracts, which I'm sure they have a couple lawyers that work at Amazon. I'd be willing to guess. So in their contracts, they say that their servers cannot host speech that violates the rights of others or that may be harmful to others. Okay? That is as vague and as subjective as it gets. So this company gets to decide what's harmful to others. They get to decide what violates the rights of others. And they've actually said before that they don't care about the Brandenburg Standard, which is the standard used by the Supreme Court to see whether or not something is free speech or protected speech. They don't care about that because they're not a governmental agency. They're a private company. So I think that's really what it's going to come down to. And I don't know if Parler really has a dog in this fight. I think it was a bad start with the judge. I don't think Parler is going to be successful here because Amazon's a private company. Parler signed the contracts. And my guess is Amazon's going to give them an out, saying, if you show us the policies you put into place and you do start pulling down these posts, then we'll put you back up on the servers. But I think that's a double-edged sword for Parler because they realize some of the people go there because it is uncensored, which is good and bad, but mostly bad in this situation because people are using it criminally almost. So I don't think it's going to really work well for Parler if they do set up those policies and procedures and they're bowing down to big tech. So it seems like a lose-lose. What do you think is going to happen?
Well, the lawyers or the experts that were in the courtroom say that the judge was totally unsympathetic to Parler. And that, this is a contract, it's a private company. So until it changes, until they're regulated like a utility, you know how you get electricity in your house? That's a utility. That's regulated. They have to have rules. They're a public company that have regulations. There's no regulations. This is strictly by contract. If you don't abide by the contract, like any other contract, you're going to lose.
And I think it's interesting. They didn't put anything in the lawsuit about violating free speech. They're not standing on any constitutional grounds because Parler knows they don't have any standing on those issues. They're sticking to antitrust. They're trying to beat a dead horse, saying that all these social media companies and Amazon are a monopoly. That's the word you hear in antitrust. They're a monopoly. They have the entire industry. They're focusing on certain things in the contract, like the 30-day notice of termination. They're trying to pick certain spots And then we didn't talk about the interference with companies and business relationships. We can hit on that real quick, but I don't think they're going to be successful on any of these claims because Amazon's a private company and reserves the right to make those types of decisions, just like no shoes, no shirt, no service. Restaurants are allowed to say that. They're allowed to refuse service. Restaurants are allowed to kick you out if you say something they don't like. They reserve that right as private companies. So real quick, just go ahead and hit on the interference with companies' business relationships.
Well, there's two parts. One is the individuals that use the service, so interfering so people can't use their service. The other are vendors. All of the vendors that dealt with Parler quit.
Yeah.
They wouldn't use them anymore.
Yeah, like the credit card companies, Google, Yelp, everybody basically, once Amazon says you work with this company, you're out, everybody walks away. So nobody's going to want to deal with that. So that's basically what that interference with the relationships in business means. So we don't think it's going to be successful. Feel free to drop a comment. Tell us if you think it's going to be successful. If Parler's got a leg to stand on, we'd be happy to hear about it, answer any questions. But that's all we got for this week. Thanks for listening.